The new patch at the start of Season 10 didn't change anything too drastically, so there's actually a pretty solidified meta, but luckily for us, it's not just one composition. Let's get into the meta heroes right now for each role, the heroes that are so good in so many situations. Today's Overwatch video is made possible because of Raid, and before you go judging me, make sure to actually try it. It's a turn-based fighting game with over 800 heroes, and the big kicker is, you'll get $100 in rewards with the GameLeap link in the description. It's completely free and it works on PC and all mobile devices. You can go ahead and click the link right now to claim your $100 in rewards. It helps us keep going and it's a fun casual game. Sign up to give it a try right now. First up are the DPS, and Tracer is by far the most meta hero in that role. She's been a solid hero for most of the game's lifetime, but has also always been a dive-centric hero, who works best with a setup where other heroes also dive in with her. But right now, even with her recall nerfed for the first time ever, she's one of the best consistent damage dealers overall. Need to kill a tank? Tracer can keep drilling them with clips until all their abilities are forced. Need to win the DPS duel? Tracer still has the best duelist kit in the game, being able to dip in and out of danger with ease. And of course, Tracer is perfect for getting picks on backline. Even with her nerfed pulse bomb, the projectile size is still bigger than it was before the Season 9 changes. 5v5 has kind of been one of the best things to happen to her. Without another tank to overwhelm the front line or peel backline, she's a lot more free to do whatever she wants. She's also not all about getting kills. Overwatch is an objective-based game, and Tracer is the best hero to touch the point last second or at a forced point without getting punished. When it comes to the macro gameplay, she's insanely good at using the objective to force an advantage for her team. Defensively, she can stall the point for a long time, and offensively, she can force someone to stop the payload, then dip out and take the 5v4 with her team somewhere else. Her mobility and damage output are more than great for controlling the game, so she's the most solid meta pick right now. But looking forward to the next meta damage hero, it's clear that Tracer isn't completely uncontested. Cassidy is another one of the strongest DPS right now, with insane dominance in his effective 25-meter range. He makes a pretty good case that it's not all about damage per second. He only has 140 DPS, which is less than Sombra, but his damage is clearly a lot more consistent, obviously with the higher range, but the burst damage of each bullet is also super strong, and it makes him really good at getting picks at all times during the fight. Cassidy is a defensive mid-range option. His headshot damage is just enough to two-tap most heroes, which is also easier to do after Season 9. He also has the self-sustain to be aggressive, with 275 HP and 75% damage reduction on his combat roll. It's pretty tough to punish Tracer because of her multiple blinks and recall, and it's similarly difficult to punish Cass with his 6-second roll. In any composition, you can play super aggressive with the threat of two-tapping enemies, and any attention put on you because of it can be quickly dispelled with a backwards roll. He also has utility, which makes him even scarier than Tracer at times. She's got a lot of mobility and a lot of damage, but Cassidy has raw tankiness, a lot of damage, and crowd control. His hindering grenade is a win condition all on its own, and it makes him a counter to pretty much every mobility-based hero in the game. Some of them can handle it, but for most of them, getting stuck with it means certain death. Cass is one of the best meta picks, but he does only have 25 meters to work with, so when you need range, the most consistent hero to work with it is Sojourn. She doesn't have any fall off at all, both her projectile spam and her railgun shot are fully effective at all ranges, but it's obviously harder to fully track enemies with her projectiles at longer range, but she doesn't need it. With 130 damage burst charged up so often, she can have impact in fights all over the map. She's the most consistent option for maps where you can't fit Cassidy into those 25-meter sightlines all the time, and she also forgoes the survivability he has for a quick escape. Her power slide is pretty much the best escape ability that isn't a teleport or an instant dash. It's pretty hard to stop it in the first place, and forcing it out doesn't give you much of a window of opportunity to punish. The cooldown is only 7 seconds. There's even a good chance that you can still survive even if you mistime your slide or take a bad position with it. She's got the best burst damage and solid mobility, and she also has just enough utility with her disruptor shot. Area of effect abilities are usually reserved for tanks or niche DPS, but Sojourn has both a high range mobility kit and the ability to lock off chokes and punish stacked teams. When it comes to the damage dealers, the meta still massively favors the ones that have the most burst damage and range. Moving on to the support meta, there's a big emphasis on survivability, but unlike the DPS, there's also a bigger focus on ultimate impact. And the biggest ultimate impact comes from Kiriko with her Kitsune Rush, and she also happens to have one of the best kits in the entire game. She's not even as broken as before. Her kunai headshots matter less, and her Suzu has a longer cooldown, but her kit is perfect for every type of composition, even the ones stacked on top of each other all the time. Her healing tickets have an insanely high range, and even if it's not the best healing per second, it's burst healing. It's similar to how good Cassidy's damage is, even if it's not the craziest DPS. It's also really easy to hit, even in messy mid-fights. Having both the abilities to teleport to your allies and heal them from afar gives you so much flexibility that most other supports just don't have. And even though Overwatch is an objective-based game, it's also a really fraggy meta right now. With burst damage reduced, the burst damage that still exists is even more valuable. The fact that Kiriko can dome summon for 112 damage at any moment is incredibly useful at all parts of the fight. You can force out an aggressive player early, finish a kill mid-fight, or clutch when there's only a few people left alive. But aside from her damage and healing, her support with Protective Suzu is amazing. It's truly the Overwatch 2 upgraded version of Immortality Field, a quick invincibility duration, at least 80 heal burst, and you're right back to fighting, both for Kiriko and her ally. It's not just a save, it's also a second wind. There's a lot you can get away with when you're invincible, even if it's just for a moment. Even when she's a less optimal pick, she's by far the most reliable support. She's got even more flexibility than the DPS do, since she's pretty much half DPS herself. The next meta support pick is also a familiar one, Lucio. Ever since the Bastion Bunker meta from Season 6 ended, there's always been a good use for Lucio. His speed isn't just for enabling slow heroes, but it makes him even better than Kiriko for assisting DPS around the map. And with heroes like Kiriko, he doesn't need to be sitting on his team all the time, letting him be a lot more aggressive about taking map space. Even with 2 less damage per bullet, he contributes enough to help his DPS win duels, and his Soundwave Boop is just so good after the Season 9 buffs. He's much better than Brig now at knocking away diving tanks. Lucio's not as obviously oppressive as Kiriko can seem, but he's also so versatile that he's viable everywhere, and his sound barrier is always a tide turner. It counters so many strong ultimates right now, and combined with his natural speed advantage, it's even harder to kite from. Lucio and Kiriko are the most consistent meta supports, but Baptiste can be just as strong, and even better than Kiriko on the long-range maps. Again, it's super similar to how Cassidy and Sojourn work. When you're on those long sight lines that are much harder to close in on, Baptiste is a lot safer and can do a lot more work. His damage is still the most consistent for a healer of his caliber. He even has just a bit of burst damage with his burst fire, but overall, he's got the sustained damage and healing to win the fight, on top of all his burst effects. He literally has an ability called Regen Burst. He's a lot weaker when caught off guard by a flanking DPS, but he's also pretty impossible to approach when he's set up in the backline, and his vertical movement gives him a great advantage over DPS that would normally blitz him on low ground. Normally, Baptiste would be struggling more, because he needs an especially bulky frontline to keep enemies away from him, but right now the tank meta is pretty massively in his favor, and Cassidy is a big help, because as we move on to the tank meta, there's a pretty obvious frontrunner, Orisa. Every meta hero right now does too much, and Orisa fits the bill perfectly. She spams hard at any range. She doesn't even need to close the distance when she has no fall-off damage, allowing her to control the game from pretty much any position. Her abilities are also a perfect combo, a shorter cooldown mobility matrix hybrid and a longer cooldown with incredibly high damage reduction. Combined with her massive amount of armor at 350, it's really hard to kill her at all times, even when all her abilities are forced, and that allows her to contest anyone and the objective really easily. And even without halt, she has one of the strongest tank abilities in the game, the massive hitbox 6-second long-range stun. That only gets better at close range, allowing you to quickly finish off kills with your primary fire. If you want to get to Baptiste or Cassidy or Sojourn, you'll have to get through Orisa first, and even jumping over her isn't a great option. Both of her spear abilities have great knockback, and they're both easy to hit, making life really hard for anyone trying to hit the backline early. The game's slowed down a lot, but DPS can still do so much, so you need a tank that can handle all that damage while still dishing out enough pressure and holding enough space to buy time for your team to clean up, and Orisa does that job tremendously. But she's not good on all maps. Orisa can't jump from high ground to high ground, and although D.Va and Doomfist are easier to play, Winston is still the best dive tank. Even the best off-tank players have been playing more Winston over the course of Overwatch 2. He does the enabling and disrupting job perfectly. He now has the most armor he's ever had, and 650 HP on his bubble is enough to disrupt healing or even block frontline damage for long enough to give your DPS the advantage. There are a lot of ways to stop him from escaping with his jump, but with his secondary fire you can even play super patiently, just poking and building up primal while chipping away at aggressive DPS, and taking important space for your team. He has 40 meters range on his secondary fire, which when used correctly can really mess up enemy positioning. Everyone expects Winston to dive in hard and into all his cooldowns, but he doesn't have to anymore. He's like a mobile shielding and armor breaking machine that has a surprising amount of burst with the 40 damage melee and landing damage. And in Primal, he's got really strong kill potential. 50 damage punches and 50 landing damage makes him a lot more lethal than usual. He's still not drastically better than Orisa though. She even has her own ways of countering his engage with her spear abilities like I mentioned earlier. But with an improved neutral from the beginning of Overwatch 2 and a decent damage upgrade in Season 9, he's extremely powerful when played right. You can go ahead and click the link right now to claim your $100 in rewards. It helps us keep going and it's a fun casual game. Sign up to give it a try right now.